Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Sean Merriman and Brad Pinkerton. It's trade deadline Tuesday in the NFL. A lot of fantasy league owners are looking at that trade deadline, but it's not the same as Major League Baseball. There have been only a few major trades, only a few trades, period. But there is one fantasy-relevant trade right off the bat that we're looking at. Brad, why don't you tell us your first impression of Brandon Lloyd getting traded from the Broncos to the Rams?
Yeah, Brandon Lloyd reunited with Josh McDaniels in St. Louis. I think it's the best-case scenario maybe for Lloyd, considering how things were shaping up in Denver with Tebow taking over at quarterback and that offense going more run-heavy. So seeing Lloyd go to St. Louis is definitely good for his fantasy stock. Just the problem now is Sam Bradford is currently injured, and we don't know his status for the upcoming weeks with that ankle injury. So we may have to wait a little bit to see just how Lloyd's stock is affected, but I'm willing to bet now that his arrival in St. Louis is going to put a damper on some of these emerging receivers that we saw this past week, Denario Alexander, in particular him. Mike Sims-Walker, of course, now being released because Lloyd is there, so his stock is way down if it could get any lower. And Greg Salas maybe could hold on to some value in that slot as PPR option, but I feel like he's even going to get some targets stolen from Lloyd now that he's in town and being the number one receiver.
Sean, how are you seeing this Brandon Lloyd deal?
You know, I think that it's something that might take a while to get used to in his new offense. You know, it's hard for a guy to come in and have an immediate impact. But like Brad said, it does help, I think, in the long run. You know, he's a guy that only topped 10 fantasy points on one occasion so far this year. He has yet to get into the end zone. And with John Fox taking over in that Denver system, we all know that that was a run-first offense. Now going back to McDaniels, like Brad mentioned, you know, that's a pass-happy offense that should only benefit him.
Now, Brad mentioned the effect on the Rams receivers, the cascade down. Do you see any kind of cascade on the Broncos receiving core? For instance, Eric Decker has been doing exceptionally well. Maybe this solidifies his spot as the number 2, number 1-ish type receiver that they've got there. And more importantly, I guess, for those of us looking for a pickup, do you think Eddie Royal has a chance to come back at some point during this season or anything like that?
I think that it helps Decker for sure. He now becomes that number one receiver, and Royal, not as much. I look more as a guy like Demaryius Thomas if he's able to get healthy. He's a more big play threat, downfield type guy. And again, him and Royal aren't guys that I'm looking to waste a waiver wire, move on unless I'm desperate here.
Brad, you seem to be nodding your head. You're seeing the same thing with the Broncos?
Yeah, I like Thomas's upside, but I think like what we saw with Lloyd, he's going to be limited because of the Broncos' offense. And so you do have to temper your expectations there. I don't know if he's worth a high waiver claim, but he's an all-upside, strictly lottery pickup at this point. Eddie Royal would be more maybe the safer play in a PPR league, and he's the experienced veteran coming into that offense right now. But they're both coming off injuries.
Make the air quotes around veteran.
Exactly. They're both coming off injuries, and they're complete wild cards, but they're at least worth monitoring.
Now, another trade that we saw just before we came into the studio came down, which was Ronnie Brown getting traded to the Detroit Lions. Now, of course, Javid Best, long history of concussions going back to Cal, possibly even before that. He had a concussion again this past week. Maurice Morris was looking to be the main running back there. But now with Ronnie Brown, it looks like the Lions situation is in total flux, and fantasy leads must be in flux too.
Yeah, just when you think Momo is going to be your fantasy savior.
Oh, don't call him Momo. Momo?
Here comes Robro to save the day. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be very convoluted in that Detroit backfield. One thing we do know is that they like to pass, so this might just be an afterthought anyway. But Ronnie Brown comes in. I wouldn't be surprised to see him starting from day one, as soon as this weekend. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. Possibly they just set him aside, let him learn the system for a few weeks. They got the bye coming up in 2 weeks, I believe, week 9. And then maybe he takes over for a more significant role after that. But fantasy owners right now are just going to have to throw something against a wall and hope it sticks. If you're a best owner, you have to assume the worst now since they made this move. And where it looked like Maurice Morris was going to be the pickup, the insurance, I think now it's Ronnie Brown, but you're still not sure what you're going to get, how the carries are going to be split this week.
Sean, if we don't hear anything from here through Wednesday, which is when a lot of teams have their waiver deadline, who do you go after?
If I'm looking for a running back specifically?
Yeah, if you're looking for a running back specifically and you're targeting those two guys.
Oh, I'd probably go after Brown, but again, it's one of those things that, if I'm not going to waste a high waiver claim for him, and he might be on some rosters, in deeper leagues right now. With Detroit's situation, like Brad mentioned, they're a pass first offense, they're a pass second offense. They like to pass. They aren't gonna run the ball unless they need to. And when Mikel Lashore, rookie out of Illinois, went down this year, that was something that really has hurt them. And I guess Ronnie Brown is kind of their new guy who they hope can be a power back, but he's he's in his latter years, I would say.
You mean he's Ronnie Brown?
Yeah, in other words, he's Ronnie Brown.
All right, well, we're going to be talking about more running backs right after this break. Yes, it's true. Believe it or not, there are more teams with running back issues than the Detroit Lions right now. We saw Peyton Hillis get an MRI on his hamstring. That didn't look very good. Felix Jones might be hurt. So, Brad, why don't we start with Jones and the Cowboys? How do you see that situation breaking down, and where should fantasy owners be directing their attention?
Yeah, we've been waiting for the injury to knock out Felix Jones for multiple weeks, and finally it came in week 6. Looked like a high ankle sprain is going to keep him out 2 to 4 weeks. So what the Cowboys showed us last week is that DeMarco Murray is the guy that they turned to when Jones went down. He got the most carries instead of Tashard Choice. So I got a feeling that's what's we're going to see for the next month or so. Look for DeMarco Murray to lead this backfield. Now we're just not sure what we're going to get out of the rookie. He definitely has some of the same concerns that Felix Jones had in terms of injuries, inability to really hit the holes hard and push the pile, things like that. So, I don't know if he's definitely going to be a savior, but I think if you have Felix Jones, you definitely have to grab him as your number one claim this week.
Yeah, I mean, Jones being the kind of guy that he was, and Murray being the kind of guy that he was that we saw, I mean, you just kind of have to wonder, what does Tashard Choice have to do in order to get an opportunity at all? Sean, you're seeing the Cleveland situation breaking down. Obviously, Montario Hardesty is the first guy there. Where do you see him performing on the tiers of running backs? I mean, is he the kind of guy that if he's out there, you might say, all right, I'll waste a waiver pot. I'll burn up a waiver pick on him?
Well, I'm in a league where I own both Peyton Hillis and Felix Jones, so this hits home right here. League's known as the Legacy Cup, and as far as I'm concerned, my legacy is going down the toilet with these two guys on my roster right now. Peyton Hillis had that one big game, I believe it was in week 2 against Indy, and nothing since then. I never saw this coming, but it's a situation where he was in the game and there was some worries that he might have hurt that hamstring. Then people were reporting that he wasn't, that he was just benched. So it's an interesting situation overall. Hardesty's a guy that is a hit or miss guy where you can plug him into your lineup and maybe he'll have a big game, maybe he'll have a long run. But so far he hasn't been the most productive when we haven't seen fill in for Hillis. So I think that if you're in need of a running back, I like him. I like him a little bit more than Murray just because Cleveland seems more committed to the run. But again, nothing that I would have too high expectations on.
Now, assuming that each of those guys are starters, I'm guessing it sounds like you both like Murray a little bit better than Hardesty. We'll start with you, Sean. Would you take him, say, over a guy who's normally a number 2 running back but gets a lot of carries, someone like Reggie Bush, pending him being not injured?
Well, I'm actually going Hardesty a little more over Murray,
okay.
So I'm flipping that just because it seems like Cleveland is more committed to the run. Tony Romo loves to throw the ball. He has Miles Austin back. I think that they're going to throw a lot where Cleveland hasn't shown much in their passing game. Compared to, say, a Reggie Bush, I would put them in about the same class right now. Maybe an RB3 option. If you're in a deep league where you play 3 running backs, go ahead with that. If you have a running back that's out with an injury or has a bye, which I do in that league I talked about, then I'm going to fill in Hardesty.
Okay, Brad, where do you see those guys standing in the grander scheme?
Well, in my waiver column this morning, they were very close, but I did have Murray ranked just above Hardesty if you're looking to make pickups. But really, the edge came down to what these running backs can offer you right now. With Hillis not necessarily being ruled out for any certain length of time, his contract situation still in dispute. That could be more of a long-term value situation for Hardesty. But in terms of right now, who can help you, we know Felix Jones is going to be out. Murray can step in right away and replace Felix Jones for you in your lineup while you get things straightened out. So I feel like he's the more immediate short-term help. But possibly long term with Hardesty, he could be the better play.
Now, the last bit of running back news that came out today may have been late yesterday. I was coming in and out of the office hearing a few things. Cedric Benson might have a suspension. He was expected to be suspended 3, maybe even 4 games. That may have been reduced to 1. It's all in a really weird situation with the NFL Players Association going on. Let's say it goes down to 1 game, his suspension. Brad, what does that mean for Benson, and what does that mean for Bernard Stott, his backup?
Well, it's reported that it has been reduced to 1. Lawyers looking into it, but it sounds like a best-case scenario deal for both sides. So it sounds like Benson and his lawyer are going to accept this deal. He's going to have to sit out Week 8, which will leave Bernard Scott starting against the Seahawks. Well, so far the Seahawks have been one of the league's top run defenses. Now that might go toward their competition a little bit, but I think if you own Benson, you should already have Scott stashed because you knew this was coming. But it's best case scenario for Benson owners because he was probably going to get suspended for at least some certain period of time, and 1 game is all you could hope for.
And now for both of you guys, the last little bit of news, possibly the biggest football news of the day. Carson Palmer traded from the Bengals to the Raiders. Sean, just in a sentence or two, how do you see Carson Palmer's fantasy exploits this year?
I think it's the biggest news of the day from an NFL standpoint and probably the tiniest news from a fantasy standpoint. If there was ever I think Oakland's probably going to go with Kyle Bowler for this week. There's been some rumors that maybe they'll try to sprinkle in Palmer. That seems pretty unrealistic to me for just a short week like that. And then Oakland goes on their bye. So if there's ever a week to start Kansas City's defense, I can't believe I'm hearing myself say this, but this might be the week with Kyle Bowler under center for Oakland.
Brad, fantasy points only, more fantasy points this season, Tim Tebow or Carson Palmer?
Oh, Tim Tebow by a landslide.
Heartbeat, you say. That's just landslide, no doubt?
Yeah, no doubt.
No doubt. So
Absolutely
Carson
no doubt.
Palmer's a non-entity.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, if you're in a desperate situation or 2-quarterback league, Palmer's worth it for maybe after that bye week. But really the fantasy impact is that he will hold your Raiders receivers value higher than Kyle Bowler would have.
And that is an amazing understatement, Kyle Bowler. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.